Welcome to another episode of Civic Cipher. I'm your host, Ramses.
They call me Q Ward, but they haven't always. They used to call me Quentin, and that's not my name. And people don't really like to say Quinton, which is what Reverend Estella named me. So I just go with Q because it's easier for everybody else.
Yes, indeed. Q Ward in the building. And we are back up in you one more again. Great show for you today. A lot of important things to talk about. So stick around your radios because we will be discussing the latest from Naomi Osaka. If you haven't heard, she's been in the news lately for protecting her mental health, which is something that we applaud around here, especially when it comes to Black women, because a lot of times they're crushed under the weight of their own lives. And, you know, it always makes sense to take time out for yourself. So we're going to talk about that. Also, we're going to talk about some good things from her and from Simone Biles. We definitely want to touch on what's going on with Kyrie Irving and some of the statements that he's made and some of the things that have come true in his world. And another thing that's been in the news a lot lately is, you know, with the history in Tulsa, the Black Wall Street, and, you know, that not ever really having its day in the sun. In other words, a lot of folks not knowing exactly what took place in Tulsa, Oklahoma. You know, for today's Way Black History Fact, we're going to spend a little time talking about that. We're going to check in with our producer, DJ Swirl. He's got a little bit of something for us there. So yeah, that's really what it looks like. A lot in store for you today. So be sure to stay by your radios. But first order of business, we're going to talk about Simone Biles. So, all right. Do you know what she did?
I do know what she did.
Okay.
And I'm going to try to say this properly.
Okay.
Yurchenko double pike.
Ooh-wee.
And I saw her do it.
Okay.
And I'm kind of confused because it looked like she flipped over 3 times. And I'm not a gymnast, so I don't know what pike means. So maybe that's the part that happened twice, even though there seemed to be a third revolution.
See, the double's what threw me off. But in any case, she is the first woman to complete this maneuver. And of course, here on Civic Cipher, we love to celebrate ebony excellence, which is why we're taking a moment to do this right now. With her. If you can, check out the video. We do have it up on our social media, so don't forget to follow us at Civic Cipher. We post dope stuff like that all the time.
Some may argue that when it comes to this gymnastic thing, that she's the GOAT.
Best to ever do it.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I've heard a lot of names over the years, but I have never known anyone to be as celebrated as she is, and so that wouldn't surprise me one bit. Certainly with her making accomplishments like this, you know, putting that Black girl magic out in front of the whole world on full display. We love to see that around here.
As she should.
And another person that we have to mention is Naomi Osaka, because she's just breaking records of her own, this time financial records. Looks like she has made over $55 million in the last 12 months, making her the highest paid female athlete in a year, something like that.
Just let me borrow $2. They got a new special at McDonald's. If you buy the chicken sandwich, I think you get the nuggets or something like that. I'll look into it.
Absolutely. Well, in any case, we wanted to take a moment to make sure that we shouted out that ebony excellence before we get into the meat and potatoes of the show here. So now we have to talk about some of the other things that are taking place in her life. And, you know, as we mentioned in the start of the show, she's making news. This is Naomi Osaka. She's making news for what we would call protecting her mental health. Mm-hmm. Right. And she's gotten some backlash, a lot of support. So we don't want to frame this around the backlash that she's received. But we have to be fair. She's gotten some backlash about, you know, protecting her mental health. And for those that don't know the story, and I'm going to leave out some stuff. I'm not the biggest person when it comes to sports, so
I got you back. I've been following.
So what I understand is that, you know, she really wasn't in the proper headspace to deal with the press after her match. Now, I don't know if she won or lost a match. I don't know any of those things, but I do know that there was an interview that I came about when I was researching this segment for today's show, that this might have been from 2018, and she said something. She was talking to the reporters, and they were asking her questions about why she lost and what she could have done better and those sorts of things. And the one thing I remember her saying in that interview was how sad she was. She's like, guys, I'm so sad. And she said it with a smile, but you could really see like she's really not in the proper headspace. She's having to relive that loss. And, people deal with, losses differently. My understanding is that, to some folks, it weighs a little bit heavier than other people. And then athletes tend to be very competitive people. And so far be it for me to assume that a loss would roll off of her back. But, the way that she framed it, at least in 2018, was that, she lost, and then she has to come and relive that loss on full display and get picked apart for why she lost, so that everyone can take these little bits and pieces of her lived experience and peddle it out to the masses and frame her loss in a way that gets them clicks or gets them, views or readers or whatever the case is. And, I might be reaching here a bit, but, the way she made it seem and the way that I understand it is that it doesn't really feel like something that you're able to really account for. And, we all know that the world is changing. And, in as far as things like this, as far as, that we lived through the Me Too movement that's still happening. We're the generation that grew up, with Robin Williams always being there. He was the genie in Aladdin. He was always a comedian throughout my life. I'm born in 82, and, he battled depression that whole time, and I had no idea. And then ultimately he took his own life. And these are things that we've lived through. And so when we look at someone like Naomi Osaka, who says, you know what, I'm not going to be able to do this. I need to really protect myself. I need to be able to protect my mental health. I feel like, kudos to her. Now, one thing I do know is that there's a person named Piers Morgan. Now, Piers Morgan is not an American person. He's a British broadcaster. And, but he's still a very sort of conservative type of man. He's been very critical of Meghan Markle and her decision to protect her family and her mental health as well. How dare she? Yeah. And, now with Naomi Osaka and, the two women, I'm a conspiracy theorist to a point. I make connections and see patterns maybe where they don't exist. But when I see this elderly white man being very critical of these two young black women who are very pretty and in the prime of their lives and being very successful, it's very easy to see some commonalities there. And, of course, at the center of it is I understand that this man's experience is nothing like these women's experience. And so him and people like him, because he said it because he knows that there are people like him who want to read his take on it. They think, of course, that this woman is being a baby and this comes with the job and, on and on and on. And everybody's, very critical until something tragic happens and everyone's like, oh, no one looked at the signs. No one could have prevented this. You know what I mean? So that's the lay of the situation. But the reason that I thought, and our show producer thought it was really important to share this with you, the listener, is because, mental health is something that only recently and only just is being discussed in the black community. And we're the people who have lived through generational trauma. You know, we were born with trauma in our DNA. You know, there are those of us whose ancestors saw our countrymen ripped apart by horses, set ablaze, hung from trees, tarred and feathered, castrated in full view of everyone. You know, we were having a conversation, Q and I were having a conversation about picnics, and the origin of the word picnic and
Google
how
is free.
Yeah, check out, say it again, Q.
Google is free.
One time. So, you know, all of these things really do point to the fact that there's a lot of trauma in our story, in our history, and in our bones even. And try as we might, you know, we're men, black men. We are not black women. That is a whole other story, a whole other animal. There's a whole other facet to even the type of trauma that type of human can experience, a black woman. And so, yes, it is absolutely meaningful that we take a moment to discuss what it looks like to protect your mental health, what it looks like to draw a line, set a boundary for yourself, and understand that you have to be a priority in your own life, in your own story. I'm not trying to take anything away from people who have kids or people that are taking care of their loved ones or anything like that. But, you know, I think Cat Williams said it best. You got to be in tune with your star player. For those who are stand-up comedian fans, you kind of got to know what your limits are and draw a hard line. And Naomi sets a great example here. Now, I do recognize that this is the same woman we just said made $55 million in the past 12 months. She got fined, right?
$15,000. She was fined.
Yeah. So that might sound like a lot of money to us, but to her, you know, probably is
relative, not much.
Yeah, affordable. But, you know, there are those of us who live, and, you know, we're talking about black women in this particular instance, but all of us really need to protect our mental health and draw a line. You know, money is important, but it's not more important than the being that we are and the vessel that we inhabit, because we only get one of those. You can always make more money. But understanding that not everyone can always afford to take these liberties, you know, I implore you to explore the things that help keep you centered, standing in the middle of yourself, and that keep you going, you know, because, you know, I read something a while ago, and it said, it was about working, you know, and all of us work, we all have a job. But it was something to the effect, and I'm going to get it wrong, but it was something to the effect of, make sure that you put yourself before these jobs, because these jobs will replace you in 48 hours if you drop dead on the assembly line. But they and now I'm gonna have to paraphrase, because that's really the gist of what the statement was. But basically, you have to take care of yourself, and you're gonna be the person that writes your own story. The job is not going to write your story. These reporters and so forth from this French Open are not writing this woman's story. She's writing her own. She's making headlines for all the right reasons, and none of these reporters get to tell their story. And the French Open that chose to fine her this $15,000 is getting backlash for punishing her for protecting herself and standing up for herself and drawing a line. Now, do have to play devil's advocate here, because who would we be if we didn't? If we weren't being realistic about the way the world works, that capitalism is the the invisible hand that controls all of us to one degree or another. You know, there are those that say, well, she did sign up for this. She did have a commitment. She did have, you know, whatever was that comes along with that. And the best I can offer is that's tough. You know, I'd imagine that you play that on a case by case basis. You know, I don't know. What do you think?
It's an interesting marriage, right? The industries depend on each other for prosperity. In order for these athletes to make the type of money that they make, to draw the audiences that they draw, for their leagues to get the amount of money that they get, it's largely reliant on media and TV partnerships. So that part is true. The question you have to ask is, mandating media availability after every game and after every match, is that much access necessary? Right? Because once upon a time, before they held large press conferences after every game, there was like kind of unlimited access to the locker room. So you'd have reporters walking into the locker room after you're showering and trying to get dressed and either just lost or just won a game. And you might have 6 reporters waiting to talk to you. And they might all ask you the same question. So the press conference kind of eliminated 2 problems: the redundancy of good or bad questions, just not having to answer the same thing over and over again, and some sense of privacy in the locker room. Let's have this press conference where everyone who has a question can ask it. And if you're in the room with other reporters, if someone else asks the question you were going to ask, you no longer have to. There's a lot of conflated issues here, though. You have the treatment of black women in this country, in this world, and in the sports world specifically, not being the center issue here, but it's always going to be one, with a media that covers, you know, the slams in tennis being almost 100% white and not having any sense of relatability to what these black athletes are going through in normal life or in their professional sports life. Add to that she was preemptive. This wasn't after a win or a loss. This was going into the tournament, you know, pretty much, hey, you guys, I'm dealing with a lot right now, and I'd rather not.
I'm glad you said that.
I'd rather not do the media availability for this tournament. Now, this tournament might be relying on you, one of their stars, being readily available for the media. But on the back of Mental Health Awareness Month, you should be able to say, hey, you guys, can I have this one? I'm tired. I'm fighting depression. And she afterwards, because she got backlash for making herself unavailable, she then came out, was apologetic, but she was also very specific. You know, the example that you used earlier, I'm not even sure if you knew you were hitting the nail on the head, but having to talk to someone after you've lost, you have to understand, to reach her level of success as an athlete, you have to have either an irrational sense of confidence, right? I can beat an elephant in a fight kind of confidence, or you have to be very not okay with losing. Also to a level of being irrational. You're angry when you lose. You're sad. You cry. Those are the only type of people that can reach that level of success. The Michael Jordans, the LeBron Jameses, the Serena Williams, the Naomi Osakas. You have to have one or both of those things. And in her case, she's saying, after I lose a match, coming to be torn apart by you guys affects my confidence. Or even knowing that I have to have these conversations, win, lose, or draw, affects my mindset going into a match, so I would rather not. And that's something that she said out loud she wants to work with the leagues on to try to improve and figure out some solutions to the issue. But she's saying out loud, this is what I'm dealing with, and this is how I'm trying to deal with it. So for her to receive pushback, like I said, on the back of Mental Health Awareness Month, was a bit intentionally poetic for that league, like all other leagues, to be, you know, trying to support Mental Health Awareness Month in their marketing, and then to have one of their star athletes come out and say, this is what I'm dealing with, and to receive pushback not just from the media and fans, but from the tournament.
Yeah, they fined her.
And her, like I said, with grace and she didn't want to become the center of the story in that way.
Yeah, she said that.
So she just backed away. I just won't even compete in this tournament. I'm sorry.
Boom. And so that's what I was saying. Like, if you're, and I get it that every man, every woman is not in the same financial position as she is. But if you are and you find yourself in the position to do that, please protect your mental health. Put yourself first sometimes. Civic Cipher exists because Q and I put ourselves first. We decided what was necessary.
Man.
When we heard no, we made it ourselves. And the reason you're listening to us is because of that energy.
And at some point, we have to have a broader conversation about mental health.
Yeah.
At some point, that just has to be a part of your health. Because even calling it mental health,
it makes it separate. Yeah.
It makes it this other thing that there's still a large population that doesn't take it seriously. And especially
they make
like
light of
said,
it. It's a
so
weak people.
Being able to say out loud that I'm dealing with something mental health related gives you a stigma by itself. You should just be able to say, I don't feel good. I don't feel healthy in general.
I'm not up to it.
It shouldn't have to be my leg hurts. I should be able to express mental exhaustion without there being a stigma attached to it, or it somehow being a separate branch of health. Like, our mind is pretty darn important. I almost said something else. Our mind and our mental,
we're turning over a new leaf around here.
Quotation marks, mental health should be seen as even more important than if we broke our arm or twisted our ankle.
Yeah. As your mind has the final say, no matter what. All right. So how about this, Q? I want to get your thoughts. Got a direct quote from Venus Williams here. And she's responding to Naomi Osaka and her withdrawal from the French Open.
Responding, to the backlash.
Okay, to the backlash. So she says, and this is Venus Williams again, for me personally, how I cope, how I deal with it, was that I knew that every single person asking me a question can't play as well as I can and never will. And then later on, she goes on to say that they will never light a candle to me. So I want to get your thoughts on that.
First of all, facts.
Big facts.
And 100 emoji, and however else I can say, amen.
The black strong arm. And
however, you mentioned playing devil's advocate. As a former athlete, I played Division I football in college. I've heard the arguments of athletes that say that people that didn't play the sport or didn't reach their level of success should not be allowed to criticize. And that's kind of unrealistic and unfair.
Okay.
Like, if I go to a Michelin 5-star restaurant, I hope I'm saying that right. I'm not a chef, but if my food's awful, I should be able to say so.
Fair point.
For the chef to respond, well, you can't cook on my level, so you're not allowed to not like your steak, I think is a bit ridiculous.
Right.
So there has to be some middle ground. I get the point that Venus was making. Sometimes being critical just for the sake of it, you deserve that response, because she's absolutely right. There's nobody on the other side of these cameras or these microphones that can hold a candle to me at what I do, in the same way that she probably couldn't present a story the way that some of her, media counterparts could. So I understand the point that she was making, and she was 1000% right. But sometimes that's a bit of a straw man argument when it's presented as a person can't have an opinion or can't be an expert if they didn't play the sport or participate in it at the level that the athlete did.
Now, I know you're playing devil's advocate there, but I just want to offer something here.
Please.
So whenever, when you're watching the Olympics or something like that, and let's say a guy gets a silver medal, right? This guy just got a silver medal at the Olympics. That's dope. And then the people that talk to him afterwards are like, yeah, so you really messed up that last thing, man. So it's so heartbreaking at the last moment. They force you to not be happy, And so, I don't know. She's got a point, because if someone came to me, I'd be hype off a silver medal, man.
They treat you like if you're not first, you're last.
Yeah, exactly. And the truth is, anybody picking you apart should there's something to be said about a person picking you apart and not themselves being able to do it. If the person that got gold wanted to pick me apart, then maybe you got some ground to stand on. But I guarantee that person wouldn't be picking me apart. They would be congratulating me or otherwise letting me know how difficult I made that competition for them.
And so would the people who got bronze or didn't medal.
There you go. And so, something to think about. Protect your mental health, though, from both of us here at Civic, all three of us at Civic Cipher. And if you're just tuning in to Civic Cipher, I am your host, Ramses Ja.
They call me Q Ward, and that just so happens to be a variation of my actual name.
Yes, indeed. And if you are just checking in with us, we want you to stick around because we got some more good stuff coming your way. Not the least of which is we're going to still talk about the Kyrie Irving incident and his prediction, assessment,
and
whatever that was.
It was almost prophetic of him.
Prophetic. Okay, we're going to talk about him. That's real important. We do want to talk about some important stuff from history, so when we get to the Way Black History Fact, we're going to talk about Tulsa. We'll just call it Tulsa for now, but stay tuned. We're going to go into detail about a time in history when black folks prospered and a certain group of white folks who lived there didn't really appreciate the prosperous nature of a certain community and decided to take action against.
How dare you thrive in your own space
we'll
without
get to
bothering me.
We'll get to it. We want you to stick around, and we're going to talk about some stuff going on in Boston. Our show producer DJ Swirl has got some stuff to share with us about that, and we're also going to talk about some TikTok stuff.
Yeah,
I mean,
expound, please.
I don't know, man. I've made a couple of TikTok dances with my kids, and
I feel embarrassed because I don't get jiggy with the TikTok.
Well, maybe after we get there, we'll get you to convert.
You're gonna have to introduce me or show me how that place works.
Absolutely. Well, I tell you what. Why don't we get into it right now? So, you know the name Natasha Bedingfield?
I do.
Okay. You know the name Vanessa Carlton?
I absolutely do.
Okay.
I'm humming songs in my head right now that I refuse to sing out loud.
Okay. So what we're going to do is introduce a new segment for the show. Okay. For those who have seen Black Panther, you might know that T'Challa referred to his father as Baba, right? I thought that was a very special sounding word, meant father. But those initials happen to also line up with something that we wanted to introduce on the show. And, we'll get there right now. It's how to become a better ally, BABA. So from here on out, look out for the Baba feature on the show. And in this way, we're going to empower you to do lots of things or really reflect on yourself and reflect on those around you. And hopefully we'll make the world a better place for all of us.
Amen.
But yeah, Natasha Bedingfield and Vanessa Carlton, their music's been used in a lot of TikToks, and a lot of those TikToks are by young black kids. But Vanessa Carlton specifically, she has that song 1,000 Miles, that and I miss you.
Don't get me started, bro.
And I need you. Yeah, man.
When people are not around, and sometimes I think I can sing and it gets bad.
Listen, man. Well, anyway, her song was sampled by I know y'all wish I could play the song, but I can't because it got cuss words and ain't no clean version yet. But it was sampled by Spin a Benz.
Okay.
Whopper with the Chopper. Young and Ace. Fast Money Goon. And the song they made is called Who I Smoke.
Wow.
Right? And normally you would expect Vanessa Carlton to say, oh no, absolutely not. I'm going to keep my song. And I don't want these guys, changing what the intent of my song, or diluting it, or misrepresenting what the song is supposed to be, ruining it. Very good, thanks. Not so. She said, yeah, man, I like the song. Let him run with it, right? And, that of course led to a lot of folks saying to her, like, well, you have such a pleasant song, and they're like cussing and talking about all this violent stuff and this, that, and the third. Of course, a lot of these people that were complaining were your Karens of the world, entitled, white,
and outraged on her behalf somehow.
Right. No, had no reason to be mad themselves. If they don't want to listen to Who I Smoke, they can just turn the song off, or not listen to it.
Pause button, stop button,
any of the above. But no, they need to make it their business. And that's, consistent with the behavior of a Karen or the male equivalent. I don't know what we would call them. Kevin, whatever. If your name is Kevin,
we can't.
I'm so
Kevin,
sorry.
We got a Kevin that we love.
We love lots of Kevins around here. So anyway, but this type of person. So what she does is she says, there's a movie called Reservoir Dogs, and they're playing certain music and they're chopping off ears, and it's a cinematic expression of, some things that some people do, but it's for everyone's enjoyment. You know what I mean? It's really no different from a movie or whatever. These guys are taking the song, they're remixing it, and they're talking about stuff that I don't believe they do in real life, and even if they do, you know what I mean? It's still artistic license that
in
you're
that
able
space,
to take.
it's theatric.
Right. And, it might not be everyone's cup of tea, but I think that you're all making a big deal out of it because they're making it into a rap song and they're young black people. And I disagree. And, I'm paraphrasing. I don't want to speak for her, but this is kind of what she was saying. And she really empowered these guys to continue with their song. And then they, of course, responded favorably. They're like, yo, I got you forever, and now there's videos up to 22 million views. And that's how you become a better ally. You do some self-reflection. You recognize that there's nothing new under the sun, that all of this, like, you can point to anything else. And if it's white, it's right, and then it makes it really easy for you to check your biases, because she was absolutely right. As soon as you look at Reservoir Dogs or any movie where there's violence, if you look at horror movies, you can look at anything like that, and that's totally fine. But as soon as it's black youth,
the most
and it's music,
the most influential group of people on earth,
and it's music,
the young black American.
There you go. And then people have a problem with it, and that's something that she pointed out to a lot of folks, and so I want to give her some kudos. Become a better ally. Shout out to Vanessa Carlton and to Natasha Bedingfield. We didn't get to go into her whole story, but do me a favor, Google both of them, find out what I'm talking about. Listen to both songs if you don't know them. Yeah.
And go on the TikToks.
Yeah, go on TikTok. Yeah,
go on the TikTok.
Make yourself a dance. Have some fun. Do work. Moving on. We do want to spend a little bit of time talking about Kyrie Irving. So, Q.
Yes, sir.
You are, and Swirl are folks who are into sports. I'm a music guy. I'm a broadcaster. That's it. I don't know anything about sports. So do tell the story of Kyrie Irving.
Kyrie Irving is a very complex but otherworldly talented American basketball player. If you follow the sport at all, you know who he is. The kid is incredibly gifted.
He's a kid?
Well, he's a kid to me, which is strange to say.
That's weird. I guess he is. Huh?
Yeah.
To me too.
The young man, the man, is insanely talented.
Okay.
And very, very open-minded. He speaks his mind a lot, makes it clear that even though people think it should be, that basketball is not the center of his universe. It's just what he does. It's just one of the things he's really good at. And leading up to his return to Boston, where he used to play, he pointed out that there have been instances with not just himself, but athletes and black people in general in Boston that have not been favorable for them because there is, to put it lightly, racial tension, to put it plainly, racism in that city, in that market, and amongst the fans of the professional sport teams there.
Boston.
Recently, the Brooklyn Nets, the team that Kyrie Irving plays for, played against and beat the Boston Celtics in a playoff series. And after one of those games, as he was leaving the floor, a fan threw a bottle of water at him. And this was coming on the back of a fan spitting on Trae Young of the Atlanta Hawks at a New York Knicks game, pouring popcorn on Russell Westbrook as he left a Washington Wizards Philadelphia 76ers game. And Swirl, if you get a chance, look up for me. There's an instance in Utah where a player's family was verbally attacked by fans in Utah. Told his father that they will put a nickel in his back and watch him dance, and said some very even more offensive things to his mother.
The young player's name is Ja Morant.
Ja Morant of the Memphis Grizzlies.
Okay.
So that's what his parents had to deal with in Utah recently. So Kyrie pointed out something that's well known in the professional sports world. But people don't like being called racist, even when all of their actions fall in line with it. When they check every box, they're still more offended than you that you would call them racist than their actions showing you that that's exactly what they are. And it's very difficult to ignore race being a part of this when all of the athletes that we're talking about are black. And all of the people that violated them and disrespected them were white in 100% of these cases. So that's something that it's difficult to talk about, because a lot of people, even while acknowledging that these things are disrespectful, do not like acknowledging the racial and racist undertones that come with treating very wealthy, very successful professional athletes like zoo animals, or, people in a circus that are less human than you, that deserve less dignity and less respect than you, and who you can spit on or throw things at because they beat the team you root for in a sporting event. Not because they did anything to harm you or your family or people that you actually know, love, and care about. But you went to see your team win, your team didn't win, so how dare they? And you kind of, there's a moment of these people, I feel, suspending their reality or injecting their reality into their fanatic fan experience at these professional ball games.
Okay. Thank you. Because I didn't know that.
De nada.
So let me make sure I got this right. Kyrie Irving used to play for the Boston Celtics.
Yes, sir.
He left that team to play for the Brooklyn Nets.
Yes, sir.
The Brooklyn Nets had to play the Boston Celtics.
In Boston.
Yes,
sir.
Prior to him coming back to Boston, he said Boston is kind of a racist city.
Yes.
And then when he was leaving after beating Boston as a Brooklyn Nets player, someone threw a water bottle at him, and that person was white.
Yes.
Okay. Now, I'm going to play devil's advocate, but first, I'm going to say some stuff. You're familiar with Mandingo fighting?
Yes.
Swirl? You're familiar with?
I am not.
Okay.
Educate me, please.
Yes, absolutely. Mandingo fighting is something that very wealthy slave owners used to do when they had enough money to buy extra disposable slaves, or they thought they could make some money by fighting. It's like kind of early origins of modern boxing,
So gladiator.
Kind of, yeah.
Okay.
But very American. You're going to take your biggest, strongest slave.
Biggest, strongest Negro.
Yeah, and then have them box against the plantation down the way a little bit, and it's often a fight to the death, and all that sort of stuff. If for those who want to get a glimpse into what that looks like, you'd watch a movie called Django Unchained, DJANGO. That's how you spell it.
Silent.
Absolutely, got to talk to him, Q. Anyway, It's an exhibition. Shows strength, athleticism. It's a spectacle. And it uses black bodies. Of course, when boxing first started out, there were no such thing as black boxers fighting against white boxers, because white boxers thought that the black fighters were beneath them, when the truth is they didn't want to lose to these guys because that would be humiliating. At the time, it was assumed that white people had the stronger genetics and were more capable when it came to anything.
They were
physical.
superior human beings.
Right. And so a loss would have been tragic, and it would have, devastated and, humiliated the whole race. And then ultimately the rules became relaxed, and Jack Johnson, and then later Muhammad Ali, and then later Mike Tyson, and so forth.
Joe Louis,
all these names. So, and of course we know that to not be true. I need to say that because there might be some people listening like, oh, is that true? No, that's not true. It's not true that white people were genetically superior to black people. And that's, that I just need that to be established, because some
a lot of people still holding strong to that narrative and are very.
It's scientifically. I'm not trying to say one is better than the other. I'm just saying scientifically that's not. There's no basis for that. We all are made by the same creator, endowed with consciousness from the same source, and that's all I'm going to say about that. But no, that part is not true. Okay. Another thing I want to mention before I play devil's advocate is that, the extent of my knowledge of people being racist at sporting events has to do with really me seeing people throw banana peels on soccer fields whenever black players come out to play soccer or football, if that's how you describe it. But, but that's more of a global sport. I usually would assume that in this country, I would assume this. I mean, if you're going to an NFL game or an NBA game or whatever, most of the players are black. That's, again, a testament to that athleticism or the fallacy behind, there's lots of white players out there too, but there's lots of black players. So I would say that everybody has a shot. Okay? Don't come at me. Anyway, so it's the first I'm hearing of it. So now I'm going to play devil's advocate. What if I say to you or to Kyrie Irving that if it had been Larry Bird walking out of there, because I know him to be a Boston Celtics player.
Yes, sir.
And someone threw a water bottle at Larry Bird, there obviously is no racial component there because Larry Bird is white. How is it that we make this case a black and white case? With the person, you said someone else got spit on, someone else's family got ridiculed.
Yeah.
The put a coin in the back and dance for me, boy. The boy, that part.
I mean, the nickel in your back and dance for me part is explicit as well.
Yeah.
That entire statement had to be said together.
But if, for those that don't know, when you refer to a black man as boy, there's some historical and not insignificant racial overtones to that word boy. It's kind of like some other terms that we use where if we say it to each other, like, yo, that's my boy, it's fine. But if someone else calls me a boy and I'm a grown man, there's a real problem with that. And the thing is, a lot of folks don't know that. And so, it's our job to educate everyone. Do not refer to an adult black man as boy. It is exceptionally insulting. But that one I can get with. But the spitting one and the water bottle one, I want you to make a case for me. I know how I would do it, but I want you to do it as to why that is racial, specifically.
Last summer, you and I drove a car across the southern United States. In the middle of the night, we were stopped in pitch black in Mississippi, asked to get out of our car. a drug dog was summoned. The drug dog apparently smelled drugs in the brand new car that we just bought, and neither of us have never even tried, purchased, sold, or been around drugs.
Or alcohol.
And the officers that pulled us over were black. So one might ask, why on earth would you guys think that that had anything to do
with race?
With race. And I guess the answer I would give is show me the example of that happening to somebody that's not black. Our producer is here. He has the power of the internet. Show me the story where the white man or the black man threw a bottle at, spit on, disrespected the parents of, or poured a box of popcorn on the white player and or his family. And I know that proving a negative is impossible. Mm-hmm. So I can't say to you beyond the shadow of a doubt that it was absolutely race related. But I can't ask you that question and wait for you to never find the answer. I can't ask you that question and wait for you to never find the example where it happened the other way around.
Okay. So here's what I'm going to add to that. Now, you mentioned earlier that he said that Boston was a racist city before. So why did he say that? Was he had already left, and is that the reason he left or something? Like,
I don't know if he was prompted. I just know that it came up. And he's not singular in that.
A lot of people
sentiment.
Feel that way.
Most people, even members of the Boston media, have been honest about
Listen,
that.
I know Boston is like, I've been there, you know what I mean? So I just, we have to we have to frame the show this way.
Sir.
Well, I think that by him saying it beforehand, and then you seeing the way that there is no real regard for these professional athletes, and the fact that you cited 4 examples, at least today, of all black athletes being engaged in some way by white fans. I think that's what we call them still.
Short for fanatic.
Sure. I think that fanatic is perhaps more appropriate now. But yeah, I think that does illuminate a trend, if nothing else. And so in playing devil's advocate, that's where we would meet, saying, hey, look, we're noticing a trend here. And again, neither of us can say that it is outright racism. Everyone who did everything is a racist person, and they need to, we need to deal with them and educate, whatever it is that comes along with people like that, if they can be educated. Some folks really like where they are. Mm-hmm. But I think that pointing out a trend, and of course, in a space like this on our show, discussing it and empowering our listeners to, be mindful of things that might happen in, little league games or, peewee football games or whatever the case is. It's funny how that mentality shifted, where once upon a time, black sportsmen were beneath and not worthy and
not allowed to play in the same leagues.
All these sorts of things, to where now it's like, get out there and do a song and dance for me, or get out there and run this ball back and forth for me, or if I don't like the way you do it, I'm going to
treat you like the property or the animal that you are.
Sure. And again, I think it illuminates this sense of entitlement that often accompanies some white people, or otherwise people who I would assume are very comfortable with the white supremacist infrastructure that's in place right now, because they can benefit from it.
Absolutely.
So these people perhaps are not always white that behave like this. There's Karens who are, Hispanic, there's Karens who are black.
Unfortunately, there are.
Absolutely. You know, there's people that behave this way, but again, I think that talking about it really helps us to ensure that we know what we're looking for and we know not to let these trends continue. And I think that to one degree or another, this might even circle back to what we talked about earlier in the show, which was, you know, protecting our mental health. It's just a coincidence that today's episode has to do with a ton of athletes. And it's weird that I don't know anything about athletes because truth is I can't be bothered, man. I'm a music guy, like I said. But, you know, mental health is something that affects all of us. And I'm a lover of people. Obviously I'm black and this is the lens through which I view the world. And I feel that oftentimes the greatest need is in black communities. They're the most overlooked communities. And, you know, we have we're very forgiving people, very kind people overall. Gracious people. Absolutely. And, you know, in modern years, that's kind of afforded us the short end of the stick. But, you know, like I said, you know, we have to talk about it. We have to keep these things at the center of the narrative, and we have to make sure that we're holding the line and we're pushing for something for a tomorrow that's better than today. So with that said, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about our way Black History facts. DJ Swirl.
Yes, sir. So on this date, June 2nd, 1967, speaking about Boston's history and tying it into the racial dynamic that a lot of us see, but many of us don't really talk about. There was what they really quietly refer to as the Roxbury Riots. And when I think Roxbury, I think of the guys nodding their heads.
The Night at the Roxbury.
So, you know, if you do word association and you saw that, you might just bypass it because you're like, oh yeah, Night at the Roxbury, no big deal. No, it draws a parallel to the issues that we see lately, or that we continue to see, and that is people who have less than, who complain about receiving equity, if not equality. But that request done peacefully is met with the exact opposite. And it's done by people who have badges and who are civil servants that do not de-escalate situations. They in fact are inflammatory to the situation at hand. And this is a gross example of that I don't think either of us knew about before we brought it up. So, and this had to do with women. And these are mothers for adequate welfare. They were protesting the fact that the system, which they followed the rules on, was lazy, disrespectful, and not conducive to the process, which is welfare. And this is from a predominantly black community. But again, these are women, these are mothers. And so they eventually get joined by other men and other white folks to stage a protest that hopefully brings about change, which we see people, that varies, right? We see the storming of the Capitol, and we see people who block interstates, right?
Yeah.
Based off of your platform and your access, you protest in different ways to draw attention to your cause.
Absolutely.
And so these women did this, and the other parallel that is drawn from this story is how the police report that you look back on, which was written in real time, pales in comparison to the truth that actually came out. And so you can actually go to the Boston Globe and you can read the full length of the story. But a short version of the story is that the police labeled it as something that is unprovable and used it as the catalyst to be aggressive. And that aggression wound up leading into 5 days worth of riots that ultimately did what happened in Tulsa, which was tear down a predominantly black and prosperous community that was simply viewed as a threat by the majority and was literally extinguished for the protection of the benefactors of supremacy.
What a world we live in, man.
Our country has such an earned distrust, right? Like it's known fact by the benefactors of the system, the things that they did to tear down, destroy, and discourage Black prosperity, all the way up in every level of government, up to the president. So, I get a little irked by conspiracy theorists that are extreme.
Sure.
But sometimes, even though they're not being rational in thought and they have no evidence present to really support the way that they feel, you look back on some of the things that we've experienced and you get it.
Yeah.
It's well-earned distrust, because that's not a singular incident.
No.
It's just the one that we're talking about
Not
today.
Even kind of. I mean, I've spent my whole life learning about all these different things. I'm sure I'll never hear all of them, but tons and tons and tons of stories just like that. And, people often, they love to say, well, that was a long time ago where things are getting better. No, totally not. People get shot every day, killed every day because of 100 reasons. But the truth is, the formula is very simple. There's a white oppressor and there's a Black victim. And oftentimes the Black victim's crime was being Black and near enough, close enough. As Swirl mentioned, we were talking about and we were talking about earlier, the events in Tulsa. There was a community that was built up, prosperous, Black owned. There's bankers, doctors, you name it. And, there's conflicting reports on what started it. But really the end result was the police and the surrounding community's access to more substantial firepower, literally firepower.
I mean, their access to each other.
That too.
Members of the community being able to join with the police.
Yeah.
In destroying a neighborhood or a community.
A self-sufficient, self-sustaining Black community.
Americans who have never and will never be afforded that privilege.
And have you heard about the graves? They're trying to redo the graves so that everyone gets a proper burial. Because, at the time, the amount of death from that incident kind of overwhelmed their...
Any word on reparations? None? Okay. I didn't think so. I was just wondering out loud.
Well, listen, we do want to take a moment, not just for this show, but every show, to help frame the present and the future with the past. There's so much that we can't talk about unless we establish the facts. We establish history. We establish where we're starting so that we know how we're oriented, the direction that we're pointed in, for the future. And so, thank you very much, Swirl, for the Way Black History Fact. I want to do that every week. I think it's appropriate, and unfortunately, it might end up being a little bit sad, but, I like to end on a positive. I like to end on a high. And the truth is that the most recent protests in my memory were not as violent. They were not as, there wasn't as substantial loss of life. Of course, I'm talking about the protest of 2020. There was a lot of unity, a lot of colors, a lot of culture out on the streets, and I love to see that. But that's about as high as we're going to end on. So with that said, I want to thank you once again for tuning in to Civic Cipher. Once again, I'm your host, Ramses Ja.
They call me Q Ward.
Be sure to check out the website, civiccipher.com. That is where you're going to be able to download this and all previous versions of the show. Check out the podcast, our YouTube channel. It's all there. Hit our social media at Civic Cipher. And don't forget to donate. The show grows with your support. Once again, civiccipher.com. We're out of here until next week, y'all.
Peace.
Peace.